Hello there, I'm Jo Bradford. I'm a photographer and I live on Dartmoor National Park in the southwest of England. I spend most of my working day in my analogue darkroom, knee-deep in chemistry and absolutely loving life. But when I'm not doing that, my other great passion is trail running and running in general. Something that doesn't really go with carrying big cameras around, but I can't forget my first passion, which is photography. So what I've ended up becoming is a bit of an aficionado of smartphone photography. In fact, I love taking photos with a mobile phone so much that I wrote a book about it called Smart Photography. Check it out. If you'd like to check out my photography, you can find me on Instagram at Green Island Studios and on Facebook also at Green Island Studios. So given that I'm shooting on a mobile device, it makes sense that I edit on a mobile device as well. And so today I'm going to walk you through my workflow with Affinity Photo for iPad. Everybody ready? Let's go. So I've opened a photo straight from my iPhone 11 Pro and I haven't done anything at all to this yet. So just so that you can see, these blue spots are there to help you see my gestures. And when I open up studios and personas, you'll be able to see what I'm touching a bit more clearly. So I always have the same workflow. I kind of go through the same set of movements every time I make a new image edit, and that way I feel like it kind of gives me a bit of muscle memory. I can work through things much quicker because I do it the same way every time. And that's quite a good habit to get into when you spend a lot of your time editing pictures anyway. So the first thing I always do is go to the crop tool and crop away anything that I don't want in the picture. And I don't usually do a lot of cropping because I prefer to crop in camera. I like to crop using the original ratio here so that it matches the same format that the picture was taken in. And I would also, at this point, if I wanted to, there is a straighten tool here. I may choose to straighten the horizon by dragging the straighten tool across my horizon, but I don't need to do that today because it's looking pretty straight. So I'll apply that and zoom out a bit. Right, the next thing I usually go and do is fix the exposure. Now, I tend to take a lot of my photographs of weather and clouds, and therefore the sky is an important part of my pictures. And in order to get the sky not to be hideously overexposed, I tend to have to underexpose the land and then deal with that in the edit stage. So the next thing I'm going to do is deal with my exposure, which I'm going to do as an exposure adjustment. So I'm going to start by duplicating my layer, and that's done by opening this up, duplicating my layer, and now I'm going to make an adjustment to my exposure. So I'm going to open up the adjustments and open up exposure, and then just lift the exposure slightly to about 0.85. That'll do nicely. I can be more precise by typing it in like this if I want to. Whoops, I need to put a point in front of that, 0.85. Okay, now that I've done that, I don't want the sky to look like that. I really only want the land to look like that. So I'm now going to need to mask off the gradient. And the best way to do it in this instance is to mask it off using a gradient tool. So I'm going to drag my gradient from here, line it up about there, and now I just need to make a couple of adjustments because these nodes set how much visibility you have, and a black node is 0 visibility. So first of all, I'm going to make the top node black. I'm going to straighten that out a bit. I'm going to make the bottom node white, and then I'm going to set another node in about here. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's do that again. Black at the top, white down to about there, and set another node here and make that one black as well. And that's basically just setting the tone for, if you have a look at that exposure adjustment, you can see as I drag that node up, it kind of changes how much of the picture is affected by it. So I don't want too much of the picture to be overexposed or underexposed. I just want to find that sweet spot. So let's have a look. That's affecting the foreground, but it's not really going over the border and into the valley beyond. So I'm happy with that. So we'll call that the exposure bit done. And the next thing I need to look at, now that I've made it a bit brighter, is I can actually see, I'm keeping it nice and subtle, but I can see that there's some marks on the grass that I'd like to get rid of. And what those marks are I'm just going to come out of this for a second. They are bits of sheep wool. You see there's some here and there around where those sheep are. So I'd like to get rid of those. And the best way to do that is to use the in-painting tool. So to start with, I need a new layer to paint onto. And in this instance, it doesn't need to have anything in it. So I'll go with a blank pixel layer. And then I'll go over here and select my in-painting tool, which is hidden away behind the clone brush. When I first came to Affinity, the thing that I fell most in love with was definitely the in-painting tool. It's just magical. I really love it. So what I'm going to do is very quickly get rid of these little bits of sheep wool. Now, I like to zoom in really large and use a very small brush. Whoops, now you see that didn't disappear. That's because I'd forgotten to change from current layer to current layer and below. So there we go. If I keep my image zoomed right in, and I can make these really tiny little adjustments when I'm cleaning up like this, it means that when I zoom back out, I can see that I haven't made any big blurry areas or anything that's a very visible fix. So once that's zoomed out, that's absolutely lovely. And if I just check my before and after on that, you can see, if I just turn that on and off, that it's removed them, but it hasn't left any strange artifacts anywhere. And that's it, that's all I want to do. Right then, before we carry on, a little bit of housekeeping I'd like to do, and that is to give this layer a name. So we've just given it a clean up, so I'm going to call it clean. And with a little bit of housekeeping like that done, I'm going to be able to identify that when there's lots of layers in my stack later on. So I want to give my clouds a bit of impact. I don't want them to have loads of impact, just a little bit, so make them look a little bit more interesting. And there'll be 100 different ways you could do this, and I'm sure everybody's got their own special method. I today feel like doing it as a live filter. So before I do that, I need to create a nice clean layer to work on. So I'm going to merge all my visible layers into one fresh one, and then I'm going to open up the live filters, open up clarity, and just roughly start off by chucking 60% into the mix, and we'll have a look how that looks. Okay, that's done some interesting things to the clouds. Not massively keen on them being quite so punchy, so what I'll probably do in a minute is lower the opacity of the whole layer. But before I do that, I'm going to mask off the foreground, because actually I don't want the foreground to be affected by this clarity at all. So if I just pick that mask layer up and drop it inside this group and just check, oh, I missed the drop then. Okay, just check it's inside now, and I'm happy with that. So I'm now going to get myself a black paintbrush. I'm just going to have a look at the size of my, the width of my brush, and then I'm going to very quickly just brush over this whole area. Now you can see from the mask area in the layers, you can see exactly how much of an effect my brushing is actually having. It would help if I had the brush set to 100%. It would mean I cover it quicker. So here we go. Happy that that's done a pretty good job. I can have a look now and see that there's not much missing. Okay. The only other thing I notice sometimes with the clarity filter is that it can make very bright areas of sky look a little bit too punchy. So for this, I will drop my opacity down to 75. And I will take the brush width way down. And then I'm just going to do a further bit of masking, and it's just going to be here. Okay, so I'd like to just cover up these bits that frankly have got really hard edges where the sun is poking through and the light is so strong in those areas that it doesn't really need any more help from the clarity layer. So there's just those sort of 3 areas where they already look pretty contrasty. Okay, so just by taking the mask on and off, I can see the effect that I've had doing that, and I'm quite pleased with it. Okay, that's good work. Right, so I've now got a clarity mask. The only other thing I think is that, as I said just now, I think possibly the clarity might be a little bit strong here. So if I just, oof, yes, those clouds could just do with a little bit of calming down a bit. So I'm going to go and highlight the clarity layer and then just reduce the power of that layer by half, take it down to 50%. Now, having a look at the before and after, that's far preferable as an overall effect. So the last thing I want to do is go to this group again, and I just like to, I always am in the habit of naming my groups as I go along, and it just means that I've not got any confusion later on. So this was one to do with the sky, so I've renamed that all as sky, and I'm ready to move on to the next thing. And the next thing I want to do is add a diffuse glow to the overall effect. Now this is something that is very often overdone. I like to do it, again, there's a lot of different ways of doing it and everyone will have their own favourite. I like to do it using blend ranges. So let's start by doing the same thing I did last time at the beginning of the little edit, which was merge all my visible layers into one fresh new layer that I can work from. And with that fresh layer in place, I'm going to go back to my live filters. I can make sure that the live filters are on and then look down and find Gaussian blur. And with that one open, I just want to make some changes. So I just want to make the blur to be about a radius of about 15%. The camera that this was taken on, an iPhone 11 Pro, has got a 12 megapixel camera, so somewhere in the range of 12 pixels of radius would be okay. I think it's okay to go slightly over here. 14 will be fine. I wouldn't go much higher than that though. So now that I've set up this blur, I just want to make sure that I preserve the alpha, so I'll tick that one on. And then I'm going to change the blend of this layer. So I'm going to make sure that the layer that's got the blur on it is highlighted. And then I'm going to open up my layer options, go to my blend mode, and then I'm going to change it to overlay. Here we go. So now that that's set to overlay, I can do the other thing I want to do. You can see how that's made the image go really dark, and obviously that's not something I want. So now is where I'm going to introduce the use of blend ranges. Okay, and the one I want to do is the source layer range, and I'm going to use the absolute black node and just drag it all the way down. Okay, and you can see that's instantly had quite an effect in removing that blackness from it. So I'm going to go back now and look at my layers, and the next thing I want to do is basically do another bit of masking, and this time I want to mask out some of the foreground area that I don't want to be affected by this blur. But let's just have a quick look at what it's done to the picture. It's added an interesting blur, but it's probably a bit more than I want. So I'm going to add another mask, drag that baby down there, stick it in there. Okay, and now I'm going back to my brush and I'm going to make sure that it's selected to black and create a mask. And this time I just want to basically make my brush a bit wider. And now I'm going to go over the areas that I don't really want to see. Make it a bit smaller. I don't really want to see blurred, so I'm going to bring the detail back here. I've done it again. Go back over that at 100% opacity. Here we go. Make those sheep nice and sharp. And I just find that that kind of diffuse glow, also known as the Orton effect, is lovely in places, but you don't want it to take all the sharpness out of your picture. So if there are places where the sharpness matters to you, just paint them back in again using the mask tool. So basically cover over the part of the effect that you don't want. Well, that's what works for me anyway. And each to their own, I guess. So also along the horizon line here, it kind of matters that that's sharp because your eye catches it. So if I have a look at the effect now, zoom out so I can see all of it. That's it off and that's it on. Now the other place where I'm not too happy with what it's done is I don't really like what it's done again to the bit where the old yellow fella is sticking out of the clouds. So I am going to just very carefully mask up this area again. So it's already quite a glaring area in the picture and it doesn't need too much more attention. So let's have a look now. So I like it, but I don't like it so much that I think it couldn't do with a bit of a reduction. So I'm going to go over to the Gaussian blur layer and I'm going to reduce the opacity and I'm going to bring it right down. Let's have a look. How's that looking? 35% feels good to me. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay. So it's given me a nice glow, but it hasn't affected the areas where I think it matters, that it's still a bit sharp and it hasn't made the sky look too strange. So I'm happy with that. So guess what I'm going to do next? I'm going to highlight that layer and I'm going to call that diffuse glow. Lovely. Okay, I feel like this is building up quite nicely at the moment. So next on the agenda is those sunbeams. They are an important part of the reason why I took the photo. This is straight out of the window of my studio and I'm often very lucky seeing sunset light and late evening light appearing and doing interesting things. So I'd like to highlight a bit of the sunbeam light, but I again want to keep it nice and subtle because it's already quite a strong feature of the picture. So the best way I can think of to do this at the moment is as a curves adjustment layer. So I'm going to go over to my adjustment layers, open a curves one up and then go down to the spline and just basically pull up to start with the curve a bit and the mid-tone area. And the reason why I want to do this is I'm going to start painting in a second. I just need to be able to see what I'm doing. So at the moment I don't want the picture to look like this, so I'm going to make this layer look different by going to its adjustments and inverting it in the channels studio. So I've been in the channel studio, I've done that, I've popped back to the layer studio now. I'm now primed and ready to go. I need to get a paintbrush on the go, and this time I need to paint in white, which is all set up, hardness of 0, flow 15, opacity 100%, and I just want to have a look at my width. That's about right, and now I'm just going to basically brush in, oh hang on a minute, is that doing what I want it to do? Brush in, yes it is, the beams of light in the same direction that they already appear in. The idea here now is not to overcook it at all, but just to kind of enhance what nature already gave us. So I'm going to just make my brush size a bit bigger and just kind of enhance where the light falls. The places on the landscape where it's already sitting across the top of these trees, across the top of those bushes. It's definitely having an effect across there. I'm going to try not to paint anywhere where it doesn't already exist. Obviously this looks way too bright, so what we'll do in a sec is we'll go back, we'll take that out. So I think I'm happy that I haven't put too much into it. That's about the right amount for now. There are loads of different ways of doing this and some work better than others on individual pictures, so it's often a good idea. I sometimes end up doing 2 or 3 versions in different ways, like perhaps using the pen tool and making like vector curve on it and then coming and doing it that way. So or vector lines, sorry. So try different things, but this is the one that I think will probably have the best effect this time because there's such obvious lines already in place from the sun. So now that I've brushed over them, I'm just going to open the curves dialog box back up in the curves adjustments and get that spline back down to somewhere slightly higher, but not too high. It only wants to be a tiny amount. And there's the before and there's the after. So it's brought a little something extra to the party, but not too much. I may well come back and revisit this later. It all depends on how it feels when I get a bit further into the edit. So my final step in my edit today is going to be to add a vignette. I don't always add them, but sometimes it's nice to draw the light and the eye and the focus into an area of the picture. I'm not a big fan of just slapping a hard-edged vignette on and having done with that. So I have my own way of doing it, which is using a fill layer. So if I add a fill layer to this, but then make it black, and I like to take the opacity of that layer down to about 50%, and then I can sort of see what I'm doing. Now, I need to mask this layer off, so I'm going to add a mask to that now. And the mask layer is white, so I'll have a black pencil in place. And what I basically want to do now is just reveal the area of the picture that I actually want to see. I'm going to keep it soft and wide. I want my brush to be nice and wide, so I'm going to set it up to about 2000 pixels roughly, and the rest of it's fine. And now I'm just going to reveal in a very organic kind of way the part of the picture that I don't want to have inside the vignette. So the area that I really want to draw everyone's eye to, basically. You can see from looking up at the mask little thumbnail above just how much of an effect I'm having with my masking. And I do want to reveal some of this foreground light. I don't want that to be overdone with the mask. So there we've got the, if I just close this group up now and turn it on and off, it'll give me an idea of what I'm doing right now. That's fine, but it's really quite strong, isn't it? It really needs to be a bit more natural looking. So to do that, I need to go back down and select the black fill layer, which is this one here, and then just adjust the blend ranges a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the destination range this time, which is this one, and I'm going to bring down the highlights like this all the way down. Now, I don't know if you can see what effect that's having. Okay. And I'm just going to take the opacity down here to about 60% as well. But what should be happening now is when you look at the overall effect of this, you should be able to see that it's actually only changing the darker areas of the image and the highlights are being preserved. That's the advantage of using blend ranges to do your vignetting like this, is that it's a much more natural look. So the vignette is very definitely there, but it's not massively heavy-handed, and that's kind of how I like to do it. So let's do a before and after then. Here's where we started at the beginning today, and here's where it ended up. So that's my edit done and dusted. If you have any questions at all, feel free to get in touch through my website, greenislandstudios.co.uk, or through my social media, which is at Green Island Studios, in all the usual places, you know the drill. So thanks ever so much for watching along today. It means a lot. And a huge thanks, of course, goes to Affinity for putting on the Lockdown 2020 creative sessions. It's been an absolute blast. So yeah, thanks for having me. Stay safe, everybody.